The first
You
thing Alara
dare to
became
challenge
aware
me
of
in
was
my own
warmth on her
realm?
face,
This
which seemed
desert will
wrong.
swallow you whole.
Death shouldn't be warm.
You
Death
dare
should
to
be
challenge me
cold
in my
or
own
nothing,
realm?
or
This desert
perhaps
will
the
swallow
silvered
you
halls
whole.
her people's ancient songs described, but certainly not this gritty heat pressing against her skin like something alive and patient. Then came the pain, which seemed even more wrong because surely the dead didn't hurt. Her ribs felt like shattered glass grinding with each shallow breath. Her left leg throbbed with a sick, deep pulse that suggested something very bad had happened to it. The inside of her mouth tasted like copper and ash. She tried to remember what had brought her here, wherever here was, but her thoughts moved like syrup through frozen pipes. There had been sky, violet sky, the particular shade of Ashara at midday when the twin suns reached their apex. Then fire. So much fire. The transport lurching beneath her, metal screaming as hull plating tore away like paper. Commander Jorah Merrick shouting coordinates she couldn't hear over the roar of the atmosphere tearing through the breach. Lieutenant Shaw's young face, eyes wide with the kind of terror that came from understanding death had arrived ahead of schedule. The sensation of falling, except falling sideways, except falling in every direction at once, while the universe decided which way gravity wanted to work today. Elara opened her eyes. A human man was kneeling beside her, his face streaked with dirt and what might have been dried blood, and he was smiling. Actually smiling, as though they were meeting at some garden reception rather than in what appeared to be the scorched remains of a crash site. The smile transformed his entire face, crinkling the corners of his brown eyes in a way that seemed genuinely pleased, as if her waking up was the best thing that had happened to him all week. "You're alive," he said, and his voice carried the same inexplicable warmth as his expression. "I have to admit, I was starting to worry you were going to make me look bad at my job." Elara stared at him. Her thoughts moved slowly, testing each word he'd spoken for meaning. Alive. She was alive. The realization arrived not as relief, but as profound confusion, because she had been so certain, so absolutely certain, that she had died. "I don't," she managed, and her voice came out as barely more than a rasp. "I don't understand." "That's fair," the human said, reaching for something outside her field of vision. "You've had a pretty rough couple of days. Here, small sips." He brought a canteen to her lips, supporting her head with unexpected gentleness. The water tasted metallic and perfect. She drank 3 swallows before he pulled it away. "Not too much at once. Trust me, your stomach will have opinions about that decision if we're not careful." He set the canteen aside and sat back on his heels, studying her with an expression that managed to be both clinically assessing and somehow kind. "I'm Owen Garrett, combat medic, currently unattached to any functional command structure because my convoy got hit by the same attack that got yours. You've been in and out of consciousness for about 2 days now, which I'm choosing to interpret as your body's way of processing recent events rather than anything more concerning." 2 days. Elara tried to process this. 2 days since the attack. 2 days since... "My guard," she said, and even as the words left her mouth, she knew the answer from the careful way his expression shifted. "I'm sorry," Owen said, and he actually sounded it. "You were the only survivor I could reach. The transport was..." He paused, seeming to choose his words with care. "There wasn't time to reach anyone else." The information arrived like a stone dropped into deep water, the ripples of it spreading slowly through her consciousness. Commander Merrick, who had served her family for 30 years, who remembered her as a child learning diplomatic protocols and making faces behind visiting dignitaries' backs. Young Shaw, barely past his certification trials, still carrying that earnest enthusiasm that hadn't yet been ground down by the realities of service. All of them gone, dead while she had been unconscious, unaware, useless. "Hey," Owen said gently, and she realized her breathing had gone ragged. "Stay with me. I know this is a lot, but right now we need to focus on keeping you in the land of the living. All right? Everything else we can process later." Elara forced her breathing to slow, drawing on years of training in emotional control. Later. Yes, she could break later, in private, as a queen should. Right now, she needed information. "Where are we?" she asked. "Spectacularly lost," Owen said cheerfully, which was such an absurd response that Elara almost laughed despite everything. "Well, more accurately, we're somewhere in the Asharan Badlands, about 40 kilometers from where the attack happened, based on my extremely rough calculations. I've been carrying you, sorry about that, by the way. I tried to be gentle, but there were rocks and a pressing need to put distance between us and the crash site. Whoever hit us has been running patrols, and I figured unconscious royalty probably shouldn't be found by people actively shooting at unconscious royalty. You know who I am, Alara said. It wasn't a question. Your uniform has some fairly distinctive insignia, Owen said. Also, you talked quite a bit while you were feverish, mostly in your own language, which I don't speak, but you did mention being a queen several times in Unified Standard, usually right before telling someone named Voss that they were an idiot. Seemed pretty firm about that particular point. Heat crept up Alara's neck. Chancellor Hadrian Voss was her chief advisor, and he absolutely was an idiot. But that wasn't the sort of thing one said aloud, especially not while delirious in front of strange humans. I apologize, she said stiffly. That was inappropriate. Are you kidding? It was the most entertaining part of the last 2 days. You have very strong opinions about military logistics. Owen began checking the bandages on her arms with practiced efficiency. For what it's worth, you were right about the supply lines. Voss should definitely be routing through the northern corridor. Despite herself, despite everything, Alara felt her lips twitch. This human, this Owen Garrett, had just told her that her entire guard was dead, that they were stranded in hostile territory, and he was making observations about supply chain management as though they were discussing something abstract and amusing rather than her complete professional and personal catastrophe. You're very strange, she said. I prefer charmingly unconventional. Sounds better in reports. The bandages, she noticed, were clean and professionally applied. The wounds look good. You're healing well, all things considered. Your people have impressive cellular regeneration. Very efficient. Almost makes me wish my species had put more evolution points into tissue repair and fewer into anxiety disorders. Evolution points, Alara repeated. It's from a game. Never mind. He waved a hand dismissively. The important thing is that you're stable, mostly mobile, and unlikely to suddenly die on me, which really would make me look bad professionally. He rocked back on his heels and glanced at the sky. The twin suns were beginning their descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. We should probably move soon. There's what I think might be temple ruins about 6 kilometers east, and I'd rather be undercover before the patrols start their evening sweep. Alara followed his gaze. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, all rust-colored sand and jagged rock formations that looked like the broken teeth of some ancient beast. Ashera had been beautiful once, before the territorial disputes, before the wars. There were still traces of it in the way the light caught on crystalline deposits in the sand, in the strange twisted plants that somehow survived in this wasteland, their silver leaves folded tight against the heat. Now it was mostly known as a place where convoys went to get ambushed and medics got spectacularly lost. I can walk, Alara said, because she was a queen, and queens did not get carried through deserts like helpless children. Sure you can, Owen said agreeably, right after you stand up without passing out. Want to give that a try? Alara absolutely did not want to give that a try because she was fairly certain it would end exactly as he suggested. But she was also a queen, and queens did not admit weakness to strange humans who smiled too much and made jokes about evolution points. She tried to sit up properly. The world tilted sideways, and Owen's hand was suddenly on her shoulder, steadying her. Easy, he said, and there was no mockery in his voice now, only that same gentle competence. There's no shame in needing help. I've been doing this a long time, and I promise you the people who try to tough it out are always the ones who end up face down in the sand. Let's save us both the indignity of that, all right? Alara looked at him, really looked at him. He was perhaps 30 standard years, with the kind of face that suggested he smiled often and took very little seriously. His uniform was torn and stained, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of 2 days without real sleep. He had pulled her from a burning transport, kept her alive through hostile territory, and was now looking at her with an expression of such uncomplicated kindness that it made something in her chest ache. All right, she said quietly, and let herself lean back against the pack he'd arranged as a pillow. Excellent decision, Owen said. I'll get us packed up, and we'll head out in about 20 minutes. In the meantime, you can tell me more about why Voss is an idiot. I feel like I'm only getting part of the story. And despite everything, the death, the pain, the impossible situation, Ilara found herself beginning to explain exactly why her chief advisor's approach to military supply chains was fundamentally flawed. While a human medic she'd known for less than an hour listened as though it were the most fascinating thing he'd heard all week. Ilara had been walking for 3 hours, and she was beginning to suspect that Owen's definition of 6 kilometers was considerably more flexible than standard military measurements would suggest. You said 6 kilometers, she said, trying to keep the accusation out of her voice and failing. I said about 6 kilometers, Owen corrected, adjusting the pack on his shoulders without breaking stride. That about is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Could be 5, could be 8. The beauty of estimation is that you're never technically wrong. That's not how estimation works. It's exactly how estimation works. I estimated, and now we're walking. Very scientific process. He paused to consult a small device he'd been using for navigation, tilting it to catch the fading light. Besides, we're making excellent time. You've only threatened to sit down and die twice, which is well below my predicted threshold of 5. Ilara had not threatened to sit down and die. She had merely mentioned, in passing, that rest might be advisable from a medical standpoint. The fact that she had mentioned it twice was irrelevant. The desert stretched around them in every direction, all rust-colored sand and jagged rock formations. The twin suns cast long shadows that reached across the sand like grasping fingers. There was a strange beauty to it, the way the light painted everything in shades of fire and gold, the way the wind carved patterns in the dunes that looked almost deliberate. Tell me about the temple, Ilara said, mostly to distract herself from the burning in her leg. Well, I'm using the term temple pretty loosely, Owen admitted. It's more like large structure that appears on my scanner as being mostly intact and probably won't collapse on us immediately. But temple sounds more dramatic. And after the day we've had, I think we've earned some drama. The day, Ilara said. Singular. Fair point. The week, the ongoing temporal nightmare. Pick your preferred unit of measurement. He glanced back at her, his expression shifting to something more assessing. How's the leg holding up? Fine, Ilara said, which was approximately 60% lie and 40% stubborn refusal to acknowledge reality. Uh-huh. On a scale of I could run a marathon to I'm considering gnawing it off. Where are we? Closer to the marathon. You're a terrible liar for someone who runs an entire government, Owen said, but he slowed his pace slightly. We'll rest when we reach those rocks up ahead. Another 15 minutes. The rocks in question appeared to be approximately 300 meters distant, which Ilara's exhausted mind translated to roughly infinity. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, a task that seemed to require far more concentration than it should. So, Owen said, apparently deciding that silence was unacceptable, what does a queen actually do all day? I've always wondered, is it all sitting on thrones making proclamations, or is there paperwork? There is an astonishing amount of paperwork, Ilara said. Treaties, trade agreements, military reports, judicial reviews, planetary development proposals. That sounds thrilling. It's necessary. I didn't say it wasn't necessary. Lots of necessary things are boring. I once had to catalog medical supplies for 6 weeks. Very necessary. Also made me question every life choice that led to that moment. He hopped over a small ravine and turned to offer her a hand across. But you must do something interesting. Secret meetings, dramatic confrontations with political rivals. Ilara accepted his hand and made the jump, landing with slightly less grace than she would have preferred. Most political confrontations happen over dinner. Very little drama, mostly passive aggression about seating arrangements. Now that, Owen said, is somehow more terrifying than actual warfare. They reached the rocks, and Ilara sank down against one with relief she tried not to make too obvious. Owen handed her the canteen and began scanning their surroundings with the small device that blinked with various colored lights. Clear for now, he announced. No patrols in immediate range. No energy signatures that suggest anything actively trying to kill us. By Asheron standards, we're practically on vacation. Your standards for vacation concern me, Ilara said, drinking carefully. My last vacation involved food poisoning on an orbital station where the gravity regulators kept failing, Owen said. This is comparatively pleasant. Better view. No one charging me for the experience. He settled down next to her, pulling out a ration bar and breaking it in half. Here, not great, but calories. The ration bar tasted like compressed cardboard with vague, fruity aspirations, but Alara ate it anyway. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the suns continue their descent. The sky was turning colors she didn't have names for, violet bleeding into orange shot through with veins of red. "Can I ask you something?" Owen said, his tone shifting to something less casual. "You've been asking me things for hours." "Fair. Can I ask you something potentially uncomfortable?" Alara turned to look at him. His expression had gone serious, which made him look older somehow, the laugh lines around his eyes deepening into something else. "When you woke up," he said, "you seemed surprised to be alive, not relieved, surprised, like you had already accepted being dead." Alara looked away, back toward the horizon. "Is there a question in there?" "I guess I'm wondering if you're all right. I mean, obviously you're not all right in the general sense. We're stranded in a desert and your entire guard is dead. But are you all right in the way that matters?" No one had asked her that. Not in years. Not since before she took the crown, when she was still just Alara and not Queen Alara Thorne, before every interaction became a careful negotiation and every concern was filtered through layers of protocol and political calculation. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Okay," Owen said, and left it at that. He didn't push, didn't probe, just accepted her answer and bit into his half of the ration bar. Somehow that made it worse. "I thought I was going to die," Alara heard herself say. "During the crash, there was this moment where I knew, absolutely knew, that this was how it ended. And I had accepted it, made peace with it." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "Then I woke up and you were smiling at me like I'd accomplished something remarkable by continuing to breathe." "Breathing is pretty remarkable," Owen said. "Underrated, in my professional opinion. I'm trying to have a sincere moment here. I know, and I appreciate that. But you're also clearly spiraling a bit, and I've found that humor helps with the spiraling." He turned to face her fully. "Look, you thought you were dead, and you're not. That's disorienting. Your brain had already started processing the end, and now it has to recalibrate for continuing. It's normal to feel weird about it." "You say that like you've experienced it." "3 times," Owen said cheerfully. "Once buried in a mining colony collapsed for 4 hours. Once in a transport crash in a frozen asteroid field where I got hypothermia. Once involving a reactor leak on an orbital station that really should have been decommissioned 5 years earlier. Each time I woke up vaguely offended that the universe hadn't followed through on what seemed like a pretty clear narrative trajectory." Despite herself, Ilara laughed. It came out more like a cough, but it was definitely a laugh. "There we go," Owen said. "See? Not dead. Still capable of finding my trauma responses amusing. That's progress." He stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, we should make the temple before full dark. Plus, I promised you dramatic ancient ruins, and I hate to disappoint." Alara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs screamed in protest, but she forced herself to stand steady. "For the record," Owen said as they started walking again, "I wasn't smiling because you accomplished something remarkable. I was smiling because I was relieved. I spent 2 days keeping you alive, and I would have been really annoyed with the universe if you died anyway after all that effort." "Annoyed," Ilara repeated. "Deeply annoyed. I take my work very seriously, and having patients die on me is terrible for my statistics." He paused. "Also, because you seemed like you might be interesting to talk to once you were conscious, and it would have been a shame to miss that opportunity." "Interesting," Alara said, testing the word. "Very interesting. You have opinions about supply chains. You snore like a malfunctioning engine, and you threaten to execute someone named Voss at least 4 times while feverish. I wanted to see what else you'd come up with." He grinned at her. "Plus, someone has to explain the seating arrangement politics to me. I'm deeply invested now." They walked on toward the temple ruins, the sky darkening above them. And Alara found herself explaining the intricate social dynamics of state dinners to a human medic who listened like it mattered, who made her laugh about things that should have been frustrating, who had smiled at her like her living was a gift worth receiving. The desert stretched endless around them, but somehow it felt less vast than it had an hour ago. The temple ruins turned out to be significantly more ruined than Owen had implied, which Alara was beginning to understand was his way. Optimistic descriptions of situations that were objectively terrible. When you said mostly intact, she said, surveying the crumbling walls and partially collapsed roof, what exactly did you mean by mostly? Well, there are walls, Owen said, already moving inside to investigate. 4 of them even. That's at least 60% of what makes a building a building. The roof situation is admittedly negotiable, but we can work with it. The interior smelled of dust and something else. Something old and dry that made Alara think of libraries and forgotten things. Strange symbols covered the walls, carved deep into the stone in a language she didn't recognize. They caught the last of the daylight filtering through gaps in the ceiling, seeming almost to glow. Pre-colonial, Owen said, running his fingers over the carvings. Probably Keithan based on the geometric patterns. They had settlements all over Ashara before the territorial disputes started. Built impressive temples, then apparently decided to abandon them all and leave cryptic artwork for future archaeologists to argue about. You know archaeology? Alara asked, surprised. I know a little bit of everything. Comes from spending too much time in transit between assignments with nothing to do but read random educational materials. He moved deeper into the structure, his scanner casting blue light across the walls. Plus, ancient ruins are excellent conversation starters. Oh, this crumbling wall? Let me tell you about the Keithan dynasty. Really impresses people at parties. Do you go to many parties? Define many. Define parties. I once attended a medical conference social hour that had refreshments, which I'm counting. He paused by what might have once been an altar, now just a raised stone platform covered in sand. This should work far enough from the entrance that we won't be visible from outside, from close enough that we can run if something decides to investigate the local ruins. Run, Alara said flatly, looking at her bandaged leg. Okay, I can run. You can do a brisk hobble. We'll make it work. Owen began unpacking his supplies, spreading them out with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The good news is that I managed to rig a basic perimeter alert from some transport debris. It won't stop anyone, but it'll give us warning if someone crosses within 50 meters. He produced 2 thin metallic strips from his pack and pressed them against the temple walls near the entrance. They adhered with a soft click, barely visible in the growing darkness. Salvage proximity sensors. They'll pulse my scanner if triggered. Very low tech, which is good because high tech tends to show up on enemy scanners and defeats the entire purpose of hiding. Alara lowered herself carefully to the ground, her back against the ancient stone. Every muscle ached with a particular intensity that suggested she would be even more miserable tomorrow. How long do we stay here? She asked. Until morning, at least. After that depends on whether the relay station I'm hoping to find actually exists or if I'm navigating us toward a particularly disappointing pile of rocks. Owen sat down across from her, pulling out another pair of ration bars. The settlement ruin should be about 15 kilometers northeast. If we're lucky, the relay station there still has functional equipment. If we're very lucky, it hasn't been claimed by anything hostile. And if we're unlucky, then we continue our excellent desert walking tour until we find something better or die of exposure. But I'm an optimist, so I'm betting on the relay. He tossed her a ration bar. Dinner is served. I'd apologize for the quality, but honestly, this is on par with most military mess halls I've experienced. They ate in silence for a while. Through the gaps in the ceiling, Alara could see stars beginning to emerge. Constellations she'd known since childhood rendered strange by Ashara's position in the sector. Owen had pulled out a small light, setting it between them. It cast long shadows across his face, making him look simultaneously older and younger than he probably was. Can I ask you something? Alara said. Sure, I've been asking you uncomfortable questions for 2 days. Seems only fair. Why did you pull me from the transport? You didn't know who I was. You could have run, gotten clear of the attack zone. Owen looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Because you were alive, he said simply. I'm a medic. That's literally the job description. Find people who are alive. Keep them that way. The running away part comes after I've exhausted all other options. That's a terrible survival strategy. Oh, absolutely. My commanding officers have mentioned it repeatedly, usually while filling out paperwork about my poor decision-making. He took a bite of his ration bar, chewing thoughtfully. But here's the thing. If I'd left you there, I'd be sitting in this temple alone right now, probably still spectacularly lost, definitely not having nearly as interesting conversations about supply chain logistics. So really, saving you was entirely selfish on my part. That's not how selfishness works. Sure it is, I wanted company. You needed rescue, mutual benefit. He grinned. Plus now I can say I saved a queen. That's definitely going on my resume right at the top before can organize medical supplies alphabetically in one successfully diagnosed space flu. Space flu isn't a real condition. It absolutely is. Very technical term. Causes fever, disorientation, and an overwhelming desire to complain about recycled air quality. He stood up, moving to check his scanner. Perimeter's clear. We should try to sleep in shifts. I'll take first watch. You haven't slept properly in days, Alara said. I've been sleeping in shifts for days, which is basically proper sleep if you don't think about it too hard. You need actual rest more than I do. Doctor's orders. He settled near the entrance, positioning himself where he could see both his scanner and the approach outside. Alara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like gravity. She stretched out on the ground, using Owen's pack as a pillow. The stone was cold and uncomfortable, and she was fairly certain there were small rocks digging into her back. But somehow she felt safer than she had in years. Owen, she said into the darkness. Yeah. Thank you for pulling me out, for keeping me alive, for... She paused, searching for words. For smiling. There was a long silence then. You're welcome. Though the smiling was really just because I was too tired to come up with a more appropriate facial expression. Seemed easier than explaining that we were both probably going to die anyway. You have a gift for reassurance. I'm told it's my most charming quality. She could hear the smile in his voice. Get some sleep, Your Majesty. Tomorrow we get to find out if my sense of direction is completely terrible or just mostly terrible. Alara closed her eyes. Somewhere in the night, a wind was picking up, whistling through the broken temple walls with a sound like singing. The stone beneath her still held the day's warmth, and Owen's presence by the entrance felt like a tether to something solid and real. She thought about her court, probably receiving news of the attack by now. Voss would be organizing search parties while simultaneously positioning himself as interim authority. The council would be in chaos. Her absence would create a power vacuum that a dozen different factions would rush to fill. None of it seemed to matter as much as it should. Owen, she said again, still here. When we get back, if we get back, things will be different. My court, the politics, the protocol. You understand that, right? Another pause, then carefully. Are you warning me or yourself? Alara didn't answer because she didn't know. She drifted into sleep with the question hanging in the air between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable, while outside the temple, the desert winds sang through ancient stones and carried away the sound of her breathing into the vast and empty night. When she dreamed of fire and falling, and a smile that seemed impossible given the circumstances. A smile that had made her believe, just for a moment, that being alive was something remarkable after all. Morning came with light filtering through the temple ruins in dusty shafts that made the ancient carvings seem to glow. Alara woke to find Owen checking her bandages, his movements careful and professional. How are you feeling? He asked. Better, she said, and was surprised to find it mostly true. The sleep had helped, and her variant healing factor was already working on the damage. The pain in her ribs had dulled to a constant ache rather than the sharp agony of yesterday. Good. Your cellular regeneration is impressive. The leg wound is already showing significant improvement. He helped her sit up, then handed her a ration bar and the canteen. Breakfast of champions, or at least breakfast of people who don't have better options. They ate quickly, and Owen spent several minutes studying his scanner and the surrounding terrain visible through the temple entrance. The relay station should be about 12 kilometers northeast, he said. If we pace ourselves, we can make it by midday. And if the relay station is occupied, Alara asked, then we improvise. But the scanner isn't showing any energy signatures in that direction, which is either a good sign or means my scanner is broken. That's reassuring. I do my best. They set out as the twin suns climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace of reflected heat. But Alara found that she could walk with more confidence today, her legs supporting her weight with only moderate protest. The crutch Owen had improvised from temple debris helped considerably. As they walked, Alara found her mind turning over the situation with more clarity than she'd had since the crash. The attack had been too precise, too coordinated. Someone had known exactly where her transport would be, exactly when, exactly which ship carried her. "You're thinking," Owen observed after they'd been walking for an hour. "Is that unusual? You get a particular expression, very focused, like you're solving equations in your head." "I'm thinking about the attack," Alara admitted, "about how they knew where to strike." "Inside information," Owen said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, someone with access to convoy planning. Someone who knew the route, the timing, which transport I'd be in." "That's a short list." "Very short. My chief advisor, my military commander, a handful of senior council members." She paused, her tactical mind working through the implications. "Someone I trust tried to kill me, or someone who has access to someone you trust," Owen offered. "Could be a security breach rather than direct betrayal." "Perhaps, but either way, returning to the palace means walking into potential danger." They walked in silence for a while, navigating around a particularly jagged rock formation. "Can I make an observation?" Owen asked. "Always. You're very calm about this. Someone tried to assassinate you, your entire guard is dead, and you're stranded in a desert with a stranger. But you're analyzing it like a strategic problem rather than a personal catastrophe." "That's what I was trained to do," Alara said. "Emotion is the enemy of clear thinking. A queen must be able to assess situations objectively without letting fear or anger cloud judgment." "That sounds lonely." The observation was so unexpected, so quietly perceptive, that Alara stopped walking. "What?" "Having to turn off your emotions to function. Having to be objective about people trying to kill you. That sounds incredibly lonely." No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever looked past the training, the protocols, the carefully constructed competence to see the cost of it all. "It's necessary," she said, but her voice came out softer than intended. "Doesn't make it less lonely." They resumed walking, but something had shifted in the air between them. Some barrier had thinned. "Tell me about your 3 deaths," Alara said after a while. "You mentioned them yesterday, but not the details." Owen glanced at her, surprised. "You sure? They're not exactly cheerful stories. We're walking through a desert toward an uncertain future. I think we can handle uncheerful." He laughed at that, a genuine sound that echoed off the rocks. "Fair enough. The first one was about 8 years ago. Mining colony on Theta Station. There was a collapsed structural failure in one of the deep shafts. I was doing medical checks on the workers when it happened." His voice took on a distant quality, remembering. "Buried under rock and metal for 4 hours. Couldn't move, could barely breathe. Just darkness and pressure and the certainty that this was it. This was how I died." "But you didn't." "But I didn't. Rescue team dug me out. And when I woke up in the medical bay, my first thought wasn't gratitude or relief. It was annoyance. Like the universe had played a trick on me, made me accept death, and then changed its mind." "The second time?" Alara prompted. "Transport crash in an asteroid field. I was being transferred between assignments, and we hit an unexpected debris cluster. Ship broke apart. I made it to an escape pod, but it malfunctioned. Ended up drifting in space for 6 hours, slowly freezing to death." He shook his head. "That one was worse than being buried. At least in the mine, I couldn't see death coming. In the pod, I watched my body temperature drop degree by degree. Watched my fingers turn blue. Felt the cold creeping in. Had time to think about everything I'd never do, everyone I'd never see again." "But you were rescued." "Patrol ship picked up my distress beacon. By the time they got to me, I was hypothermic enough that I shouldn't have survived. But apparently I'm too stubborn to die properly." They crested a small rise, and in the distance, Ilara could see what might be the remains of a settlement. "And the third time?" she asked. "Reactor leak on an orbital station. I was part of the emergency medical team responding to the initial breach. We were evacuating injured workers when the containment failed completely. Got a lethal dose of radiation in about 30 seconds. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Alara could hear the edge underneath. "That one took longer. Radiation poisoning isn't quick. Had days to feel my body breaking down. systems failing one by one. And the whole time I kept thinking how unfair it was. Survived burial, survived freezing, and this was how it ended? Dissolving from the inside out? But you survived again. Experimental treatment. New protocols they were testing. I was dying anyway, so I volunteered. 50-50 odds. I beat them. He turned to look at her. And each time, when I woke up, I felt the same thing, not joy or gratitude, just this odd sense of displacement. Like I'd already made peace with ending, and now I had to figure out how to keep going. Is that why you became a medic? Alara asked. Because you understand what it's like to accept death. Owen considered this. Maybe. Or maybe I just figured if I was going to keep getting into impossible situations, I should at least know how to patch myself up afterward. He grinned, but there was something genuine underneath the humor. But yes, having died 3 times gives you a different perspective on keeping people alive. It matters. Every person who opens their eyes instead of closing them forever, that matters. They reached the settlement ruins an hour later. The relay station was exactly where Owen's scanner had indicated, a squat building that had weathered better than the surrounding structures. The door was sealed, but Owen managed to override the lock with his multi-tool. Inside, dust covered everything, but the equipment looked intact. Owen moved immediately to the power systems while Alara examined the communication arrays. Think you can get it working? She asked. Probably. The solar backup should still have some charge. Give me 10 minutes. While Owen worked, Alara moved through the station, her tactical mind cataloging everything. This place had been abandoned for years, maybe decades, but it had been built well, designed to last. She found herself at a window overlooking the desert they'd crossed. From here, she could see the direction they'd come, could trace their path through the wasteland. 2 days ago, she'd been certain she would die in that crashed transport. Now she was here, planning her next move, analyzing threats, thinking 3 steps ahead. And it was all because a human medic had smiled at her like breathing mattered. Got it, Owen called it out. Power's on. Communication should be functional. Alara returned to the main room to find display screens flickering to life, decades-old systems booting up with surprising reliability. Can you establish a secure connection, she asked. Depends on what you mean by secure. I can probably get a signal out, but whether anyone's listening or whether we're broadcasting our location to hostiles, that's harder to guarantee. He pulled up a communications interface. Who do you want to contact? Alara thought carefully. Not Voss, not if there was any chance he was compromised. Not the general military channels, not until she knew who to trust. But there was one person, one member of her council who had always operated slightly outside the normal power structures. Lady Cassian Reed, she said. She's on the senior council, but she's always maintained her own intelligence network. If anyone can be trusted, it's her. And if she's part of the conspiracy, then we'll know very quickly and we'll run. Owen nodded and began setting up the connection. It took several minutes routing through old relay protocols and bypassing security systems that hadn't been maintained in years. But finally a connection established. The face that appeared on the screen was sharp-featured and intelligent, with steel-gray hair pulled back severely. Lady Cassian Reed looked exactly as Alara remembered, except for the flash of genuine relief that crossed her face when she saw who was calling. Your Majesty, Cassian said, and her voice carried weight. Thank the stars. Where are you? Alive, Alara said. That's all you need to know for now. Fair enough, the palace is in chaos. The attack on your convoy made news 4 days ago. Official position is that we're still searching for survivors, but privately, most people think you're dead. Who's running things? Voss, technically. He invoked emergency protocols and established himself as interim administrator. But there's already maneuvering. General Blackwell is pushing for military authority. Senator Crane is demanding legislative oversight. Alara and Owen exchanged glances. The names Cassian mentioned were exactly the ones they discussed. Cassian, Alara said carefully, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The attack on my convoy wasn't random. She watched Cassian's expression shift from relief to sharp attention. Go on. It was too precise, too coordinated. Someone knew exactly where we'd be, exactly when, exactly which transport I was in. Inside information, Cassian said, and it wasn't a question. You think someone in the government set you up? I know they did. I just don't know who yet. Cassian was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as she processed implications. I've been investigating irregularities for months, she finally said. Nothing concrete, just patterns that didn't quite fit. Resource allocations that didn't match stated purposes. Communications that seemed unnecessarily encrypted. I thought it was standard corruption, power plays, the usual political maneuvering. It's more than that, Alara said. Yes, I'm beginning to see that. Cassian's expression hardened. If you're right, if this goes to the top levels of government, then your return is going to be complicated. That's why I need your help. I can't just walk back into the palace without knowing who to trust. Smart. Voss has already deployed what he's calling recovery teams. Officially, they're searching for survivors. But I've noticed they're heavily armed and operating under sealed orders. Orders to eliminate survivors, Owen said quietly. Cassian's eyes shifted to him, noticing him for the first time. And you are? Captain Owen Garrett, combat medic. I pulled Her Majesty from the wreckage. Then you have my gratitude, Captain. Cassian's attention returned to Alara. Your Majesty, I can arrange secure extraction, but it will take time. At least a day, possibly two. Can you stay hidden that long? We'll manage, Alara said. But Cassian, when I do return, I need you to be ready. We're going to have to move quickly. Understood. I'll prepare what I can without raising suspicions. She paused. There's something else you should know. The official investigation into the attack is being conducted jointly by Voss's office and General Blackwell's intelligence division. Of course it is, Alara said. They're investigating themselves. Precisely. And Senator Crane has been calling for formal succession protocols, suggesting that if you're not found within another week, the council should begin transition planning. The picture was becoming clearer. 3 power centers, each positioned to take a piece of authority if she disappeared. Not a single conspirator, but a coordinated group. How long until extraction? Alara asked. 18 hours minimum. I need to arrange transport that won't raise questions, route it through channels I control. Where should I send them? Alara provided coordinates for an abandoned settlement about 8 kilometers from their current position, far enough that if the relay station was compromised, the extraction point would still be secure. 18 hours, Cassian confirmed. And Your Majesty, I'm glad you're alive. Truly. So am I, Cassian. So am I. The connection ended, and Alara found herself staring at the blank screen, her mind already working through the next steps. So we wait, Owen said. So we wait, but not here. If they trace this transmission, this station will be the first place they look. The settlement you mentioned for extraction? Too obvious. We need somewhere else. Somewhere we can watch the extraction point without being visible. Owen consulted his scanner. There's a series of caves about 3 kilometers north. Natural formations should shield us from most scanning methods. Then that's where we go. They spent another hour at the relay station, with Owen downloading what data he could access, and Alara searching through old files for anything useful. She found maps, resource surveys, geological data. Nothing immediately helpful, but information was always valuable. As they prepared to leave, Owen paused. You know, when this is over, when you've dealt with whoever tried to kill you, you're going to have to make a choice. About what? About me. I'm a complication, Alara. A human who knows you're alive, who helped you survive, who has no official standing in your government. When you walk back into that palace, people are going to ask questions about who I am and what role I played. Alara looked at him, this human who had saved her life, and asked if she was all right and made her laugh about supply chains and seating arrangements. Let them ask, she said. You're staying with me. That's going to cause problems. Probably, but I've discovered something these last few days. The people I thought I could trust tried to kill me, and the person I had no reason to trust saved my life. So maybe it's time I started making decisions based on what I know to be true rather than what's politically convenient. Owen smiled at that, the same gentle expression that had greeted her when she woke from death. Fair enough, just wanted to make sure you knew what you were signing up for. I know exactly what I'm signing up for. Someone who uses the wrong utensils and makes inappropriate jokes and sees me as a person instead of a crown. Well, when you put it that way, I sound delightful. They left the relay station as the twin suns reached their zenith, making their way north toward the caves where they would wait for extraction, for confrontation, for whatever came next. And Alara found herself thinking not about the conspirators she would face or the political crisis waiting at the palace, but about the question Owen had asked. Are you all right? She still didn't know the answer. But for the first time in years, she had someone who cared enough to ask. The caves were cooler than the desert surface, natural formations that twisted deep into rock. Owen found a chamber about 50 meters in, large enough to be comfortable but hidden enough to provide security. From the entrance, they had a clear view of the extraction point, 8 kilometers distant. They settled in to wait, and the hours passed slowly. Owen checked her injuries again, changing bandages and monitoring her healing progress with professional efficiency. But there was something else in his attention now, something personal beneath the medical competence. Can I ask you something? Alara said as the suns began their descent toward evening. You've been asking me things all day. Fair. Can I ask you something about earlier, about what you said regarding loneliness? Owen set aside the medical supplies and gave her his full attention. What about it? How did you know? That it's lonely? Having to be objective about everything? He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because I've seen it before. In command officers who have to send people into danger. In doctors who have to make triage decisions. In anyone who has to function at the highest level while everything inside them is screaming. He paused. And because when you talked about analyzing the attack, about working through who might have betrayed you, your voice was perfectly steady. Too steady. Like you'd trained yourself not to feel the hurt underneath. Feeling the hurt doesn't help anything, Alara said. Maybe not, but not feeling it doesn't make it go away either. It just means you carry it alone. The observation sat between them like a physical thing. I don't know how to do both, Alara admitted. How to feel and still function. The two seem incompatible. They're not. They're just hard. Takes practice. Did you practice? After my third death, I didn't have much choice. You can only suppress that much trauma for so long before something breaks. So I had to learn how to feel everything and still do my job. Feel the fear and still run toward danger. Feel the grief and still keep people alive. He smiled, but it was sadder than his usual expression. Turns out the two aren't incompatible. They're actually connected. Caring makes you better at what you do, not worse. You just have to learn not to let it paralyze you. Ilara thought about this, about years of training that had taught her the opposite. That emotion was weakness. That objectivity was strength. That a queen must be above such human failings. Except Owen was human, and he didn't seem to think they were failings at all. I don't know if I can do that, she said, and you're already doing it. You cared enough about your guards' deaths to grieve them, even while analyzing the attack. You care enough about your people to risk everything returning to face conspirators. You care enough about... He stopped, seeming to catch himself. About what? Alara prompted. About this conversation we're having. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be asking these questions. You'd be focused entirely on strategy and tactics. But you're trying to understand. That's caring. Night fell fully, and they took turns keeping watch. When it was Alara's turn to sleep, she found herself lying awake, staring at the cave ceiling, and thinking about everything Owen had said. About loneliness and caring and the possibility that she'd been taught wrong about what strength meant. About a human who has died 3 times and learned to feel everything and still function. About the question he kept asking, "Are you all right?" She still didn't know the answer, but she was beginning to understand why it mattered that someone asked. Morning came, and with it the sound of approaching engines. Owen was instantly alert, scanner in hand. Transport coming in, landing pattern matches what Cassian described. They made their way to the extraction point carefully, Owen keeping his weapon ready despite the apparent friendliness of the arrival. The transport bore Cassian's personal insignia, and when the hatch opened, 6 guards emerged, all wearing expressions of genuine relief. "Your Majesty," the lead guard said, dropping to one knee. "Lady Cassian sends her respects in her urgent recommendation that we depart immediately." "What's happened?" Alara asked. "General Blackwell has deployed search teams throughout the Badlands. They're getting closer. We need to move now if we're going to get you back to the palace safely." The flight back was tense, the transport flying low to avoid detection. The guards briefed Alara on the situation at the palace. 3 days of K's, Power struggles playing out in council chambers and military command centers. Voss consolidating administrative control. Blackwell positioning military assets. Crane building legislative support. A careful division of power, pending only the final confirmation that Queen Alara was dead. "We're taking you through the public entrance," the lead guard explained. Lady Cassian was very specific about this. A public arrival with crowds and cameras makes it harder for anyone to act against you immediately. "She's thinking tactically," Alara said approvingly. "She said you'd understand." They approached the palace as the twin suns reached midday, and Alara could see crowds already gathering at the public gates. News had spread somehow, whether by Cassian's design or simple rumor. Thousands of Vaerians pressed against barriers, their faces turned upward, waiting. The transport settled in the main courtyard, and the hatch opened to a wall of sound. Cheering, crying, her name called out like a prayer answered. Alara stepped out into the light and the noise doubled. She saw holovid cameras tracking her movement, broadcasting her return to every corner of the coalition territories. She saw palace staff rushing forward, some with genuine tears, others with carefully controlled expressions. She saw council members emerging from the palace proper, Voss among them, his face a mask of relief that didn't quite reach his eyes. And she saw Owen, standing slightly behind her, obviously out of place in his rumpled combat medic uniform, scanning the crowd with professional caution. Cassian was there within moments, embracing her formally before speaking quietly in her ear. "Emergency council session in 1 hour." They couldn't refuse with the crowds watching. "Be ready." "I am," Alara said. The next hour was a blur of security briefings and formal greetings and carefully worded questions about her ordeal. Through it all, Owen stayed close, not speaking unless spoken to, but present. A constant reminder that she'd survived because someone saw her as worth saving. She was taken to her private quarters to change, and she found Owen standing outside her door when she emerged in formal court attire. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Whatever you're planning, whatever's about to happen in that council chamber, you could leave me out of it. Would probably be easier politically." Alara looked at him, this human who had carried her through a desert, and asked if she was all right and taught her that feeling and functioning weren't incompatible. "No," she said simply. "You stay with me. What happens next, you're part of it. That's going to complicate things." "Good, I'm done with simple." The council chamber was exactly as she remembered, and exactly as foreign. The same 12 seats, the same high ceilings, the same geometric light patterns. But now she saw it differently, saw the careful positioning of power, saw the masks everyone wore. Voss was already present, along with General Blackwell and Senator Crane. Cassian sat slightly apart from them, her expression neutral, but her eyes alert. 8 other council members filled the remaining seats, their faces showing varying degrees of relief, concern, and calculation. Alara took her position at the center platform. Owen was not in the chamber, but she knew he was close, waiting in her private study as she'd asked. "Ready." "Your Majesty," Voss began, his voice carrying perfect tones of relief. "We are, of course, profoundly grateful for your safe return. The attack on your convoy has raised serious concerns about security protocols." "Indeed," General Blackwell added, "we need immediate changes to prevent such breaches in the future." Senator Crane leaned forward, his expression sympathetic. "Your Majesty, we must also address concerns about the trauma you've experienced. Perhaps a brief transition period would be advisable. Time to recover before resuming full duties." And there it was, the opening move. Carefully phrased as concern, actually a play for power. Alara let the proposals come, let them outline their carefully constructed plan. Voss handling administration. Blackwell managing security and military. Crane coordinating legislative matters. A 3-way division of authority, packaged as temporary assistance. Lady Cassian raised objections, questioning the timing, the motivations. The chamber erupted into argument, voices rising, accusations flying. Alara stood at the center and watched, absorbing patterns, seeing connections she'd missed before. Finally, she raised her hand. The gesture was small, but silence fell immediately. "Thank you all for your concern," she said. "However, before we discuss transition periods, I believe we should discuss what actually happened during the attack." She saw Voss's expression shift. saw Blackwell's posture stiffen slightly, saw Crane's careful neutrality. The attack was not random, Ilara continued. It was precisely coordinated, targeting specifically my transport. The insurgents had detailed intelligence about our route, timing, and vehicle specifications. Intelligence that could only have come from someone with access to royal convoy planning. The silence was absolute now. "What are you suggesting?" Blackwell asked, her voice dangerous. "I'm suggesting that someone in this government attempted to have me killed." Voss stood, his face pale. "Your Majesty, if you're implying that someone in this council, this is paranoid. This is exactly the kind of compromised judgment we were concerned about." "Sit down, Hadrian." The use of his first name shocked him into compliance. Alara walked slowly around the circle, her footsteps echoing. "I spent 6 days in the Asharan Desert, 2 of them unconscious, 4 of them walking through hostile territory with a human medic who had no reason to save my life except that I was alive, and he believed that mattered. During that time, I had considerable opportunity to think about my life, my government, and who I could trust." She stopped behind Cassian's chair. "And I realized something interesting. I trust a human I've known for 6 days more than I trust people I've worked with for years. Do you know why?" No one answered. "Because he had nothing to gain from keeping me alive. No political advantage, no power to consolidate. He saved me because it was right, and he stayed because I asked him to, knowing it would cost him professionally." She returned to the center platform. "Now let me tell you what I know." She pulled a data chip from her pocket and inserted it into the console. Holographic displays materialized above the platform, showing encrypted transmissions. "These are communications intercepted from the relay station in the Asharan Badlands. Transmissions sent from this palace to insurgent forces over the past 6 weeks." The text scrolled slowly. Convoy schedules, travel routes, security details, references to Asset Corvus, Asset Vulture, Asset Raven. 3 separate horses, all with command-level clearance, all coordinating what they called Phase 2, Transition Protocol, a plan to divide power 3 ways after my death. She looked directly at Voss. Administrative control, military control, and legislative legitimacy. Very neat, very organized. The holographic display shifted, showing equipment manifests. Weaponry used in the attack, traced to Palace Armory requisitions, signed off by General Blackwell's office. Blackwell's hand moved toward her belt. Cassian's guards at the doors immediately raised weapons. "Financial records," Ilara continued, "payment trails from Senator Crane's discretionary accounts to shell companies supplying insurgent forces." The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. "And finally, communications from 4 days ago, after I survived, discussing what you call the human complication, planning to eliminate Captain Garrett and use my attachment to him as evidence of compromised judgment." She looked at each conspirator in turn. "You made 2 critical mistakes. First, you assumed I would die in the desert, broken and helpless. You underestimated what I'm capable of when everything else is stripped away." She paused. "Second, you assumed that if I survived, I would return diminished, traumatized, easy to manipulate. You saw the crown and forgot there was a person underneath it." Voss was shaking his head. "This is insane. Article 17 of the Coalition Charter. In cases of proven treason against the crown, the monarch may invoke immediate arrest and detention pending tribunal. Do I need to call for a vote?" Blackwell moved, reaching for her weapon. She never cleared the holster before guards had her restrained. Crane tried to run. 2 guards caught him before he reached the door. Voss simply sat down, all fight gone. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "I suspected at the relay station. I confirmed when I intercepted your communications about eliminating Owen. You made it personal, Hadrian. That was your mistake." Guards moved forward to secure all 3 conspirators. "The council will vote on their replacements after a full tribunal," Ilara said. "This government will be transparent about what happened here." She looked at the remaining council members. "We were betrayed by those we trusted most, but we survived, and we will rebuild, stronger and more vigilant than before." As the conspirators were led away, Ilara remained at the center platform watching. Everything in its place, everything calculated, except this time, the calculations were hers. The formal state dinner that evening was technically a celebration of Alara's return, but everyone understood it was really a demonstration of power. The Great Hall was filled with courtiers and dignitaries, all carefully watching each other. The three empty seats where Voss, Blackwell, and Crane should have been sat like open wounds. Owen sat 2 seats to Alara's right, looking profoundly uncomfortable in formal court attire. She watched him struggle with various utensils for the first 3 courses, watched Lady Serena, the protocol officer, wince every time he chose incorrectly. But she also watched him ask an elderly council member about her grandson's health, watched him make a younger dignitary laugh with some story about medical supply disasters, watched him be genuinely kind in a room full of calculated politeness. When the speeches began, Alara excused herself quietly and stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the gardens. The night air was cool. She stood there for several minutes, just breathing. "I used the wrong fork for the fish course," Owen said from behind her. "I'm pretty sure Lady Serena is drafting my execution order." Alara turned to find him in the doorway, his formal jacket already rumpled. "The fork is irrelevant," she said. "Easy for you to say. You've had a lifetime of fork training." He moved to stand beside her at the railing. "Big day," he said quietly. "Yes." "You okay?" There it was again, the question no one else asked. "I don't know," Alara said honestly. "I exposed a conspiracy, prevented a coup, and secured my government. But my chief advisor of 10 years tried to have me killed." "That's a lot to process." "It is." They stood in silence. "Can I tell you something?" Owen said. "Always. When you stood up in that council chamber and presented that evidence, when you faced down 3 people who tried to kill you and didn't flinch, that was remarkable. Not because you're a queen, because you're Alara." He turned to look at her. "You were terrified, I could see it. But you did it anyway. That's not royal training. That's just who you are." "Who I am," Alara said softly, "is someone who survived because a human medic smiled at her when she was dying." "No," Owen said firmly. "Who you are is someone who survived because she's brilliant and strong and capable. I just provided medical support and occasional commentary on supply chains. You provided more than that." "Maybe. But everything that happened in that council chamber, that's all you." Alara looked at him, the same gentle expression, the same uncomplicated kindness. "My court still thinks keeping you here is a mistake," she said. "Probably is, politically speaking. There will be gossip, speculation about our relationship, questions about your role. I can handle gossip." Alara smiled. "I'm asking you to stay, officially, as my cultural liaison and special advisor." That's a very vague title. It's meant to be. It's meant to be. It gives you authority without defining specific duties, which means you can do what you've been doing, providing outside perspective, questioning assumptions, asking if I'm all right. She paused, and also learning which fork to use for fish. Owen laughed. "Cultural liaison, I like it. Very official sounding." "So you'll stay?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah, I'll stay. For as long as you want." "Good, because I need someone who sees clearly. Who reminds me that being a queen doesn't mean forgetting how to be a person." "You're both," Owen said. "That's the whole point. You're not queen or person. You're queen and person, both at once. That's what makes you remarkable." From inside, someone was calling for Her Majesty to return. But for this moment, standing on a balcony with a human medic who had saved her life and seen her clearly and asked if she was all right, Alara was just herself. Just Alara. And that felt like enough. "Come on," she said, "now let's go back inside. And try to use the correct spoon for dessert." "No promises, but I'll do my best." They walked back into the great hall together, and the assembled court watched as their queen returned with the human at her side, both of them smiling. And if anyone had opinions about appropriate behavior or political wisdom, they kept those opinions to themselves. Because Queen Alara Thorne had just exposed a conspiracy, dismantled a coup, and rebuilt her government in a single day. And she had done it not despite keeping the human close, but perhaps because of the clarity his presence provided. 3 months later, after the tribunals had concluded and the new council had been sworn in, and the government had settled into its new shape, Alara was reviewing colony development proposals when Owen appeared in her study doorway. "Your routing through the western corridor is inefficient," he said without preamble. Voss's ghost is haunting your logistics. Alara looked up from her work and smiled. Explain. Well, Owen said, settling into the chair across from her desk, if you reroute through the northern pass and adjust the supply depot placement, and she listened to this human who had smiled at her when she thought she was dying, who had carried her through desert and asked if she was all right and stayed when staying, made no political sense at all, who saw her, clearly, crown and person both, and found her remarkable anyway. Outside, Ashera's twin suns were setting, painting the palace walls in shades of amber and gold. Inside, a queen and her advisor discussed supply routes and colony planning, their voices mixing with the evening wind. Owen had official quarters now, a suite appropriate to his position as cultural liaison and special advisor. But most evenings found him here, in Alara's study, discussing everything from medical supply distribution to ancient Kethan archaeology to the continuing mystery of formal dining utensils. The court had stopped speculating about the nature of their relationship, mostly because Alara had made it clear through both word and action that such speculation was irrelevant. Owen was part of her government, part of her life, and that was the end of the discussion. Some relationships defied easy categorization. Some connections mattered more than labels. There's something else, Owen said, setting aside the data pad with the logistics reports. I got a message from my old command. They're requesting my return to active duty. Alara felt something tighten in her chest. And I told them I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, that I have a position here that matters, that I'm not interested in leaving. He paused. Unless you want me to go, if this has run its course, if having me here has become more trouble than it's worth, don't, Alara said, don't finish that sentence. She stood and moved to the window, looking out over the gardens where she could see staff moving through the evening routines, everything ordered and proper and exactly as it should be. Do you know what I realized today? She said. I was in a council meeting, listening to various proposals for expanding our agricultural initiatives, and Senator Marwick said something particularly short-sighted about water distribution. And my first thought was, I need to tell Owen about this. He'll appreciate how ridiculous it is. She turned to look at him. That's what you've become, not just an advisor or a political complication, or the human who saved my life. You've become the person I want to share things with. The ridiculous things and the serious things and everything in between. Owen stood and crossed to where she stood. For what it's worth, he said, when I got that message from my command, my first thought wasn't about my career or my service record. It was that I couldn't leave because you might need me to explain why Senator Marwick is wrong about water distribution. He's very wrong about water distribution. I assumed as much. They stood there for a moment, the evening light painting long shadows across the floor. Are you all right? Owen asked. And there it was again, the question that had become their foundation. Yes, Alara said, and realized it was true. Yes, I think I actually am. Good, because I have opinions about tomorrow's trade negotiation proposals that you're going to want to hear. Do they involve pointing out that Chancellor Reed is routing supplies inefficiently? They absolutely do. Alara laughed, and it felt easy, natural, like something she'd been doing all her life instead of something she'd only recently remembered how to do. Outside, the twin suns finally dipped below the horizon, and the palace lights came on, illuminating gardens and corridors in the careful architecture of power. Inside, a queen and her advisor continued their conversation, moving from logistics to archaeology to the philosophical implications of fork placement, their voices carrying through the quiet evening. And if someone had asked Alara whether she was happy, she would have had to think about the answer. Happiness seemed like too simple a word for this complex feeling of rightness, of being seen clearly, of having someone who asked if she was all right and actually cared about the answer. But she was something close to happy, something that felt like being alive was remarkable after all. And that seemed like enough. More than enough, actually. It seemed like everything.